Okay, so we've got a fascinating story to dive into today. It's from the Gospel of Luke, and it's about a conversation between John the Baptist and Jesus.
Yeah, it's a familiar story for many, but you've sent over some research and notes and a YouTube sermon that really make you think about it in a whole new way.
Yeah, the setup is just, well, it's dramatic, isn't it? You've got John the Baptist who's in prison for, well, for speaking truth to power, right?
Right.
And he sends his disciples to ask Jesus straight up, "Are you the Messiah?"
And what's interesting is how Jesus responds. He doesn't just come out and say, "Yes, I am."
Exactly. It's like instead of a declaration, he gives this sort of progress report.
Right.
I loved how that YouTube sermon put it. It said it's like a church condensing its entire annual report into like one impactful sentence.
That's a great analogy, I think, because it really highlights how Jesus focuses on action, like tangible proof.
Yeah.
The blind, the lame walk, the poor hear this good news. It kind of shifts the whole conversation away from like theological debate and more towards the reality of what's happening in people's lives.
Okay, and this is where I thought your research was really interesting. You've been looking at the Old Testament and how this idea of good news
Mm.
is presented there.
Hmm.
And it's not always about, fire and brimstone and all that.
Oh, definitely not. In fact, you pointed out some verses from Isaiah that talk about comfort for those who are mourning and freedom for those who are captive and good news for, those who are oppressed. And those themes, healing, liberation, they're all woven throughout the Hebrew scriptures. It really challenges that very one-dimensional interpretation that focuses just on God's wrath.
Right. And it makes you think about John the Baptist
Yeah.
because he knows these scriptures, right?
Yes.
He's expecting this Messiah who
Yeah.
will come with like earth-shattering power.
Right.
And then Jesus responds in this, well, it seems kind of indirect, almost. And as the sermon pointed out, that might have left John feeling, well, maybe a little bit let down.
It's a really interesting point. It picks up on this tension that the sermon explores. John's looking for a Messiah who's going to overthrow injustice with force, but Jesus is talking about like a different kind of revolution,
Yeah.
one that begins with healing and restoring individuals. It's really about, taking no offense at me. That's where it gets powerful, almost like Jesus is saying, hey, look, my approach, it might not be what everyone expects.
Exactly. And the sermon called that a warning, but also a promise, right? Like following Jesus, it's not always going to be, easy or comfortable.
Right.
It could challenge our ideas about, well, about how things should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that challenge, it becomes even deeper when you look at your notes on how different groups throughout history have understood this passage. You mentioned that some have used it to justify just like being passive when faced with injustice,
Right.
while others have seen it as this call to like radical social action.
It's amazing how one story can be interpreted in so many ways. And I have to say, that part about the ministry of raising the dead, that really stood out to me. Not, literally bringing people back from the dead, but like as a metaphor,
Right.
breathing life into situations that seemed hopeless.
It's a really beautiful image, isn't it? And it speaks to how powerful hope and compassion can be. But as the sermon pointed out, choosing mercy and peace when everyone else is, demanding law and order, that can be really tough, controversial even.
For sure. And that tension, it's something you've been researching too, right? You found examples of like modern day prophets and activists who have been criticized for being committed to peacemaking and reconciliation, especially when it goes against, well, the political climate.
Yeah, absolutely. And those examples really highlight the cost of discipleship, choosing to follow Jesus, to embrace his message of love and forgiveness. It can lead us into some uncomfortable situations. It might mean, standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular, maybe even dangerous.
It makes you wonder, what dead situations in our own lives and our communities might need that kind of resurrection? Where do we see things broken that need healing, or division that needs bridging, or despair that needs, needs hope?
Those are such powerful questions, and they get to the core of what it means to be a follower of Jesus today. It's not just about, reciting things or following rules. It's about, living out his values in our everyday lives.
Yeah, it's about taking that deep dive, like the sermon said, into that sea of mercy. And that brings us to that last part that really hit me, that idea of swimming past our own disappointments.
Because, let's face it, we all experience disappointment, maybe even disillusionment sometimes. We look around and we wonder, where is God in all of this? Why are things the way they are?
And it's so easy to just, well, to give in to that cynicism, to become hardened by it all. But this passage and that image from the sermon, they remind us that there's another way.
A way that requires us to lean into faith, even when it's hard, to trust that even in the midst of all the brokenness, God is still working, calling us to be agents of healing, of restoration.
It's like it all comes back to that question from John.
Yeah.
You know, are you the one? But then it makes us ask, like, what does it mean for us to be the ones carrying that message, that hope, that healing out into the world?
Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. It's not just, about understanding what Jesus said. It's about living it, becoming, living examples of that love, that compassion. I think that's really the true meaning of that ministry of raising the dead.
And it makes you think what dead situations, maybe in our own lives, are just waiting for that. What's broken in our families, our communities, the world even, that needs that touch from God.
Yeah, and maybe, just maybe, if we take that dive, if we swim past those, disappointments and fears, we find ourselves in that sea of mercy, but also in that sea of purpose, too. The purpose that comes from, joining in with that work, that healing and restoring.
This has been, well, a really insightful deep dive. Thank you for joining me and helping us connect all these powerful ideas.
It's been great. I always enjoy digging into this stuff with you.
And to you listening, we hope this conversation sparked something for you, gave you some new insights, some new questions even. What dead situations in your own life, need resurrecting? What does it mean for you to live out that message, that healing and hope in the world today? We hope you keep swimming, keep diving deeper, see where it takes you.